All right, let's dive into these San Francisco Board of Supervisors meeting minutes.
We're looking at September 3rd, 10th, and 17th to be exact.
Meeting minutes, though. That doesn't exactly sound like a page turner, does it?
Well, you know what they say. Local politics are best observed at the local level. This is where the rubber meets the road.
So true. And trust me, we found some interesting stuff buried in these documents. You might be surprised to learn how much actually passed unanimously.
Yeah, a lot of things flew under the radar.
But don't let those unanimous votes fool you. There were definitely some heated moments.
Oh, absolutely. And do we mention the money?
Oh, the money. Get ready for some eye-popping figures. We're talking millions upon millions of dollars being moved around.
Billions, yes.
But we'll get to that later. Let's start with something a little more, well, celebratory. On September 3rd, the board voted to make the rainbow flag installation at Harvey Milk Plaza an official city landmark.
A landmark. Big deal.
Exactly. What does this landmark status actually mean, beyond just preserving a symbol?
Well, it's more than just a symbol, right? I mean, it really recognizes the fight for LGBTQ rights, and not just in San Francisco, but nationally. It's a reminder of how far we've come and, especially important now as those rights are being challenged in other parts of the country.
And just imagine, years from now, tourists might be visiting that flag, all thanks to a line item in some meeting minutes. It really makes you think about these documents differently.
Oh, absolutely. Speaking of making history, remember that whole debate about automated rent setting?
You mean those algorithms some landlords use to set rent? It felt very Black Mirror-esque.
Great. Well, the board actually passed an ordinance banning it on September 3rd, unanimously.
Wow, that's huge. A win for renters, right?
It's a step in the right direction, for sure. But here's the thing. This is just the beginning. We still need to see how it's enforced. Plus, it doesn't solve the root problem in San Francisco. We desperately need more affordable housing.
So it's a step, but not a solution. What does this whole thing tell us about, the role of technology in the housing crisis?
That's the million-dollar question. It's complicated. I mean, you have people on both sides of this.
Right.
Some say that these algorithms, while they seem objective, right, they can actually make existing inequalities in the housing market even worse. And then you have others who say, it's just a tool, and the real problem is just the lack of affordable housing.
It really makes you think. Okay, shifting gears a bit here. Let's talk about the police department's request to use drones.
Now, that was a hot topic on September 17th.
Drones over San Francisco. What's the deal? Give me the rundown.
So the police department, they proposed this policy for using unassisted aerial vehicles for things like crime scene investigations, large events,
Makes sense.
And of course, that brought up some concerns.
Yeah, San Francisco isn't exactly known for embracing surveillance technology. What were some of the main concerns?
Privacy was a big one, as you can imagine. But Supervisor Melgar, she introduced some amendments to address this concern.
Okay, so it wasn't just a rubber stamp. What did Supervisor Melgar's amendments say?
Well, she added some pretty specific prohibitions, like no using drones for random surveillance or targeting individuals based on, protected characteristics. Basically trying to prevent those Big Brother scenarios people were worried about.
Smart.
Oh, and she also put in language requiring the police department to delete any data collected by the drones within a specific time frame, unless it's part of, an active investigation.
So that data doesn't just sit around forever. Good move. So did all this satisfy the other board members?
Not entirely. Most supervisors voted in favor, but Supervisors Ronan and Walton remained opposed.
Even with the amendments? Why is that?
Well, this really highlights that tension you see in San Francisco, that balance between public safety and civil liberties. Where do you draw the line? It's a question we're all grappling with as technology advances.
No easy answers there. Okay, let's switch gears again. Libraries.
Don't fall asleep yet.
Now, before you think this is going to be boring, let me tell you, even library decisions can get a little dramatic in San Francisco.
Oh, tell me about it. In the September 17th minutes, there was this item about a new library branch for Ocean View, Merced Heights, Ingleside, Lakeview. Sounds straightforward, right?
New library.
Yeah.
Everyone wins. What's the catch?
Well, the proposed location, 100 Orizaba Avenue, it caused a bit of a stir. The item actually got re-referred back to the Rules Committee.
Re-referred. For those of us who don't speak fluent bureaucracy, what does that mean?
It's basically hitting the pause button. So instead of voting on it, they sent it back to the committee to talk about it more. And in San Francisco, that usually means something's up.
Something's up with the library. Like what's...
Well, it's about more than just finding an empty lot for a building. This is about making sure the library is accessible, equitable, that it works for everyone in those neighborhoods. And that's where it gets, let's say, interesting.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Lay it on me.
Well, for some people, they argued that 100 Orizaba Avenue, yeah, it's a city-owned parcel, but it's not very centrally located.
Right.
So if you don't have reliable transportation, good luck getting there. And others weren't convinced that this location truly serves the needs of all four neighborhoods. So you start to see those neighborhood dynamics come into play, maybe even a little politics.
Ah, so it's more than just books and reading nooks.
Exactly. And it also involves a whole lot of money, which brings us to our next point. It's about the money, right? Building a new library branch doesn't come cheap.
You're telling me. And speaking of not cheap, these meeting minutes were full of big numbers, big contracts, grants, you name it.
Yeah, millions and millions.
Exactly. Millions and millions. It's a lot to keep track of. One thing that caught my eye, though, was Mayor Breed's appearance at the September 10th meeting.
Oh, yeah, the mayor made an appearance.
What brought her to the board that day? It wasn't about the library, was it? Or the drones?
Actually, no. She was there to talk about how San Francisco handles contracts and grants, city spending in general.
Okay, so important stuff, but maybe not as attention-grabbing as drones and libraries. What was the main message?
Transparency and accountability. Those were her big points.
Makes sense, especially with everything else we've been talking about.
Right. Like she was saying that public trust is key, and that means making sure all city business is done openly and ethically.
Was she talking about making specific changes or more like a high-level vision thing?
A little of both. She mentioned some recent changes, like some new executive directives, appointments, even some ballot measures.
To increase oversight.
Yeah, exactly. But she also said that there's still a lot more to be done.
So kind of a look what we've done but stay tuned kind of message.
Exactly. She specifically talked about being more transparent about who gets city contracts.
Which is always a hot topic.
For sure. Especially here in San Francisco, there's a lot of money at stake. Her focus was on a fair process, making sure those tax dollars are being used responsibly and ethically.
That's what we like to hear. But even with more transparency, it's hard to keep track of it all.
Absolutely. And that's why these meeting minutes, as dry as they may seem, are so important.
They give you that inside look.
Yes. They show you how decisions get made, who's making them, and where the money's going.
Speaking of making your voice heard, there were a lot of people who showed up for public comment at these meetings.
Oh, yeah, all kinds of folks. Taxi drivers, concerned citizens, even someone advocating for the rules of existence, beauty, and joy.
Only in San Francisco, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
But in all seriousness, how much weight do those public comments actually have?
That's a good question. Legally speaking, they're more about transparency.
Give people a chance to speak their minds.
Right. The supervisors don't actually have to do anything based on what people say.
So it's more about setting the tone, getting a sense of the public's concerns.
Yeah, pretty much. But that doesn't mean it's completely pointless.
Right.
If you have enough people speaking out about the same issue, it can definitely influence things down the line.
It's like anything else in politics. Persistence is key. Okay, let's circle back to the Ocean View Library situation. Last we heard, he was stuck in re-referral limbo.
Right. Well, Supervisor Safai, he represents that district, and he's been really pushing for this new library.
Of course.
Well, he decided to take action. He introduced File Num 240699.
Catchy.
Right. Basically, this ordinance would have skipped the whole re-referral thing and just made 100 Orizaba Avenue the library site.
So he went for it. Bold move. How'd that work out?
Not quite as planned. See, to pass this ordinance, he needed a supermajority vote.
Supermajority, that's more than a simple majority, right? What does that even mean?
It means he needed 9 out of 11 supervisors to vote yes. They do that to make sure there's really strong support, especially for measures that involve a lot of money or have a big impact.
High stakes. So did he get that supermajority?
He did not.
Oh, no.
Which means the library location debate continues.
This is like a political thriller. But instead of car chases, it's all about ordinances and supermajority votes. So what happens now? Is the Ocean View Library doomed to stay in re-referral forever?
Not necessarily. Remember that re-referral just sends it back to the Rules Committee to keep talking about it.
So they're going to try to find a compromise.
Exactly. They'll probably have more hearings, get more input from the community, and hopefully come up with something that enough supervisors can agree on.
And hopefully that compromise will address those concerns about accessibility and equity.
Exactly. And this is where those public comments we were talking about can actually make a real difference. If people make their voices heard loud and clear, it could really influence the Rules Committee's decision.
It's a good reminder that even in these kind of, procedural matters, there's still a role for the public to play.
Absolutely. And speaking of public debate, remember the drone ordinance? We didn't quite finish that story.
Oh, right. Supervisor Melgar's amendments.
Those were big.
Yeah, she addressed those privacy concerns, right?
She did. But that wasn't the end of the debate. Remember those two supervisors who voted against it, even with her amendments?
Ronan and Walton, right?
Yeah, them.
What was their reasoning? It seemed like the main concerns had been addressed.
This was more about a difference in philosophy, I think. Supervisor Ronan, for example, she's been very vocal in the past about surveillance technology.
Right, she worries about how it impacts marginalized communities.
Exactly. Her vote was about more than just the specifics of this one ordinance,
What about the bigger picture?
Yes. It's that classic dilemma. We want law enforcement to have the tools they need, but we also don't want to live in a police state.
Right, where do you draw the line?
Exactly. And this is something we're going to be grappling with more and more as technology keeps advancing.
Okay, so drones, libraries, what else? Didn't we have a whole list of big-ticket items to get through?
Oh, yeah, those multi-million-dollar contracts and grants. Get ready for some sticker shock.
All right, let's talk big money. City contracts. Lay it on me.
Well, one item that really stood out was the $2.6 million settlement with RES System 3.
RES System 3, that sounds familiar.
They were the contractors on that Warnerville electrical substation project, the one in Oakdale.
Oh, right. The one that was, way over budget and behind schedule.
That's the one. Seems like the city decided it was just better to cut their losses and move on.
Wow. $2.6 million to just make them go away. Makes you think, especially with Mayor Breed talking about transparency and all that.
It does raise some questions, and that's just one example. We saw millions more in these minutes, the Concourse Garage acquisition, all those grants for COVID response, fentanyl overdose prevention.
It's a lot. Easy to get lost in the numbers.
It is, and that's exactly why we need to be paying attention. How are these decisions being made? Who benefits? Do these expenses actually match up with what the city says is important?
Good point. It's our money after all. And speaking of priorities, this whole deep dive has really shown just how many different groups are trying to have their say in San Francisco.
Oh, absolutely. Housing advocates, tech companies, neighborhood groups, you name it.
Everyone wants a seat at the table.
It's a microcosm of what cities all over the world are dealing with, right? How do you balance progress with preserving what's already here? How do you make things equitable while still encouraging innovation?
Tough questions.
They are. And these meeting minutes, as dry as they might seem, they give us this really interesting look at how those questions are playing out.
Yeah, and it's not just about the big flashy stuff. Sometimes it's those little details, those procedural things that tell the real story.
Like that whole re-referral thing with the library.
Exactly. One little word, but it speaks volumes.
It shows you what's happening behind the scenes, the negotiations, the power dynamics, all of it.
It's like we accidentally stumbled into a political thriller.
Right. But instead of car chases, it's ordinances and supermajority votes.
So for our listeners who are now hooked on local politics, where should they go to learn more?
Well, we've got all the meeting minutes we talked about linked on our website, so you can check those out. But honestly, the best thing to do is just stay informed.
These meetings are happening every week.
Exactly. Go to the Board of Supervisors website, see what's on the agenda, maybe even go to a meeting in person. You might be surprised by what you learn.
You might even get inspired to get involved. All right, that's a wrap on this deep dive into the world of San Francisco Board of Supervisor meeting minutes. Until next time, stay curious out there.